My name is Norah Whitaker, 32-year-old. The china glistened under the chandelier as I slid into my seat halfway back, not in the family section, but among the enlisted Marines and local families. It was deliberate. I wanted the distance, the insulation. The theater at Camp Lejeune hummed with the restless shuffle of uniforms, the squeak of shoes on waxed floors, the faint tang of floor polish that never seemed to fade no matter how often the place was scrubbed. A thread of cologne drifted from the lance corporal 2 rows ahead, sharp against the undertone of starch and nerves. I adjusted my jacket, the fabric pressing against my shoulders like armor. 12 years of service, 4 deployments, long nights bent over maintenance logs and motor pool rosters, and yet, to this crowd, I was invisible. My name wasn't on the program, not even as an afterthought. Instead, the glossy pages were plastered with Chase Rawlings, smiling, polished, my father's golden stepson. His teeth were too straight, his ribbon rack too neat for someone who'd barely earned the right to wear it. 6 months in uniform, and already he was the centerfold. I flipped the booklet closed and set it across my lap. My palms itched, remembering the desert heat at 0300, the weight of a rifle across my chest, the names of Marines written in a notebook I carried so no one could ever claim they'd been forgotten. None of that mattered here, not tonight. "Steady, ma'am," a low voice murmured beside me. Master Sergeant Ortega, my ballast in a sea of pretense, tilted his head once, calm, immovable. Eyes are always watching. I gave a single nod, the kind that said I understood, that I was braced. The Master of Ceremonies climbed onto the stage, his voice cheerful, rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for a special recognition ceremony. Please silence your phones." The audience shifted, a wave of motion as heads turned toward the front. My father stood at ease, every inch the commanding general, medals burnished under the harsh stage lights. His posture radiated authority, his chest a wall of ribbons from wars older than me. But I knew the man beneath the uniform, the clipped notes he used to send, unsigned with love, just CW. The Christmas cards with Chase beaming front and center while I was relegated to a ghost in the background. I tightened my throat and forced my breathing steady. Beside me, Ortega didn't move, but his presence was a quiet wall against the rising storm inside me. 2 rows ahead, a toddler whimpered, quickly hushed by a mother whose hands trembled as she rocked him. The sound sliced through the ceremony's polish, reminding me of the ordinary lives behind the uniforms. For a moment, I envied their innocence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC continued, "please welcome Major General Charles Buck Whitaker." Applause rose, loud, certain, unwavering. My father stepped forward, the spotlight catching the silver stars on his shoulders, making them glint like frost. He carried the leather folder as though it were weightless, though I saw the slight flex of his tendons, the way his thumb pressed into the hinge as if testing it. I felt the old memories press against me, the Christmas mornings when Chase got center stage, the barbecues where I was asked to take photos instead of being in them. My father's offhand dismissal, "Dependable, Norah, not exceptional." The words had branded themselves into me, like a verdict. "Good afternoon," my father said, voice clipped, efficient, amplified by the microphone until it filled every corner of the theater. "We are here to recognize excellence and to announce official orders." His gaze swept the room, impersonal, like a formation. But for a heartbeat, his eyes caught mine. The weight of 12 years pressed into that glance, recognition and refusal tangled together. Then he turned away, lowering his gaze to the folder. The air in the room thickened, a collective breath held. Elaine, my father's second wife, leaned toward Chase, smoothing the front of his dress blues, with fingers that lingered at his collar as though she could pin pride into place. Chase's smile flickered under the lights, wide but nervous. He looked like a boy thrust onto a stage that had been prepared for him long before he'd earned it. In the back, a row of VFW jackets glowed tired blue under the dim lights. I spotted Joe McCready, cap tilted just so, leaning slightly forward like a man who'd never quite learned to rest his back against a chair. He nodded faintly when our eyes met, a promise that someone in this room knew what sacrifice looked like. The leather folder waited on the podium, heavy, official, final. I couldn't see the words inside, but I could feel them, Orders written in ink that would shift the balance of a family, a career, a legacy. Ortega's sleeve brushed against mine, deliberate, steady. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. By direction of the president, the MC announced, his tone rising with scripted pride, we now proceed with the reading of the official orders. My father opened the folder. The hinge creaked faintly, audible only to me. The air seemed to collapse inward, as though the walls themselves were waiting for the name to be spoken. And I thought, not for the first time, that this was the moment I had been bracing for, the moment when years of being dependable, invisible, forgotten, would either be erased or finally seen. But before the words came, before the reckoning unfolded, I needed to tell you how we arrived at this stage. Because what was written in that folder was not luck. It was not politics. It was 12 years of sweat, silence, and scars carved into bone. The reckoning hadn't begun here. It had begun years earlier, in Abilene, Texas, where the wind never stopped blowing and my mother's voice planted a seed I carried into every battle. And it was that seed that would bloom, unbidden, in this theater tonight. Abilene, Texas. Dust clung to your jeans no matter how much you shook them out. The wind carried grit that slipped through the seams of every door and window. Our clapboard house rattled with every storm, but inside, my mother's voice kept it steady. Margaret Whitaker wasn't a woman who wasted words. She worked double shifts at a diner off South 14th Street, came home with her hair smelling like bacon grease and her apron stiff with coffee stains. She would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator that barely worked and balance the checkbook by hand, muttering numbers under her breath while the box fan rattled uselessly against the July heat. One evening, I dropped my grocery store name tag on the counter after a long shift bagging paper and plastic. My hands smelled like cardboard and detergent. Mom looked up from the checkbook, her eyes tired but alive. "Don't you want something more than this?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "More than what?" I shrugged, reaching for the half-empty carton of milk. "More than scraping by. More than waiting for your father to call once a month." She pushed the checkbook aside, her fingers pressing against the table as though holding it in place. "You've got his grit, Norah, but not his pride. That makes you better. Don't waste it." It was the first time she said it out loud, that I didn't have to measure myself by my father's absence, that maybe I could build something he couldn't take credit for. My father, Charles Buck Whitaker, was a Marine even at home, except he wasn't really home. He lived in pressed uniforms, in command tents, in the pages of official orders. To me, he was a voice on the phone once a month, words clipped, efficient. "Proud you're working hard. Be smart. Don't expect much." Not once did he end with "Love, Dad," just his initials, CW. When I turned 18, I bought a bus ticket east and signed papers that would cut me into something new. Paris Island, South Carolina, was a world away from Abilene's flat roads. The sand fleas bit like fire, the drill instructors' voices carved through bone. My mother sent me a crumpled card, her handwriting slanted, a verse scrawled across the top, "Be strong and of good courage." I kept it in my breast pocket, close to my heart, through every screaming run and rifle drill. Graduation day, the humid air clung to us like a second skin. When I received my eagle, globe, and anchor, I felt taller, though I hadn't grown an inch. I searched the crowd for my father. He wasn't there. My mother was, standing in a faded dress, clapping until her palms went red. "Kiddo," she whispered when she hugged me after, "you make this family look tall." Those words were a medal before any I would ever pin on my chest. The years blurred. Camp Lejeune, Okinawa, Kuwait. Deployments stacked like bricks. Each time I looked for a letter, a call, anything from my father. Instead, I received silence. Or worse, reminders of where I didn't fit. The reminder came wrapped in glossy paper, a Christmas card, neat handwriting from Elaine, my father's new wife. On the front, a staged family photo, my father in his blues, standing tall beside a woman younger than him and a boy about my age with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. On the back, "Season's greetings from the Whitakers. Meet Chase." I stared at it for a long minute, my hand hovering over the trash can. I set it on the table instead. My mother glanced at it, shook her head, and went back to folding laundry. She didn't need to say anything. I already knew. The first time I met them was 2 years later, at a barbecue in Arlington. My father's new brick house was nothing like the clapboard home in Abilene. The yard smelled of fresh sod and charcoal, kids ran barefoot on trimmed grass, and Elaine floated through the crowd with a hostess's practiced smile. "Norah, sweetheart," she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "You should think about public affairs. Less rough." Her eyes flicked to the scar on my forearm, faint but visible from a Humvee door slammed in Kuwait. Less rough. The word sat like a stone in my chest. Chase was in college then, tall, soft, still carrying the weightless arrogance of someone who'd never seen a day of struggle. He talked about internships, about leadership programs, about futures. My father slapped him on the back, pride in every gesture. "Future leadership material," he boomed. "This one has the brains for it." When I stepped up in my service uniform, my father pressed a camera into my hand. "Take the group photo, Norah." So I did. Chase stood beside him, grinning like he belonged. I stood behind the lens, unseen, capturing the family I wasn't invited to join. That night, in the guest room, with the hum of the air conditioner louder than my thoughts, I realized my place wasn't daughter. It wasn't Marine worthy of respect. It was the reminder of a past my father wanted to outshine with his new family. So I threw myself deeper into the Corps. Holidays spent on duty, billets nobody wanted, deployments others ducked. My mother's health declined, bones aching, strength waning. She never asked me to quit. "You're doing it right, Norah," she said, even when her voice grew thin. "You're showing up." When she passed, I was in Kuwait. The Red Cross message arrived too late. I sat on the edge of a cot under humming fluorescent lights, her Bible on my lap, my father's silence louder than the generators outside. No call, no letter, just nothing. That was when I learned family could be chosen. Ortega became the one who checked in. Marines like Jaime Tron and Marcus Reed, who looked to me not for speeches but for steadiness, became my anchors. But Chase's shadow followed. The Christmas cards never stopped, his face always center, Elaine's handwriting looping around his achievements. And me? 12 years, 4 deployments, scars on my arm and my heart, not a line in their cards worth writing. That was the soil in which the next chapter would take root, the chapter where Chase finally wore the uniform, and my father treated him like the second coming of Chesty Puller. The first time I saw Chase in uniform, I had just returned from Okinawa. My boots still smelled of CLP oil, the salt air clinging faintly to my camis. 12-hour days spent inspecting rifles, long nights teaching junior Marines how to square their boots, and then, without even a pause, I drove north to Arlington for one of my father's backyard gatherings. Chase was 19. His hands were soft, his smile rehearsed, his dress blues pressed so stiffly they looked borrowed. My father introduced him like he was unveiling a monument. "This is the one," he declared, resting a hand firmly on Chase's shoulder. "Future leadership material. He's got the brains for it." Chase offered me a handshake, his grip tentative. "Good to meet you, Captain Whitaker." The title sounded foreign on his tongue, like he'd practiced it but never really believed it belonged to me. I caught Elaine hovering nearby, pride radiating from her like perfume. She adjusted the crease of his sleeve and whispered something into his ear, the kind of stage mother gesture you'd expect at a school recital, not a military barbecue. When I mentioned I had just come from a training rotation in Okinawa, Elaine tilted her head, lips pursed in sympathy. "That must be stressful," she said. Stressful. I thought of rain soaking through gear until it clung like ice, of salt sticking to our uniforms, of young Marines laughing anyway because that's what resilience looked like. Stressful didn't begin to cover it. But I didn't argue. I just smiled, tight and thin, and let her words hang in the humid air. Later that evening, my father handed me a camera again. "Get the shot, Norah." Chase stood in the middle, grinning. Elaine on one side, my father on the other, his hand heavy on Chase's shoulder. I clicked the shutter. Another family photo without me. Driving back to base that night, I stopped at a gas station on I-95. The fluorescents buzzed overhead, the coffee was burnt, and I sat in my car staring at the photo still glowing on my father's phone screen. Chase looked like he belonged. Me. I was the one holding the camera. So I buried myself deeper in the work. The motor pool became my second home. The smell of oil seeped into my camis, stubborn and permanent. I walked line after line of vehicles, running my hands over steel frames, scribbling notes under the flicker of a failing fluorescent light. Marines joked that the motor pool was the graveyard for officers' careers, but I wore it like armor. Work done right mattered, even when nobody noticed. My performance reviews always carried the same refrain: dependable, steady, not exceptional. The words echoed like a drumbeat, steady enough to lull you into resignation if you weren't careful. Once, during a review, my father leaned back in his office chair, eyes sharp. "You're reliable, Norah," he said, "but you're not command track." I kept my face still, my voice even. "Copy that, sir." He nodded, satisfied, as though I'd accepted my fate. But outside his shadow, there were people who saw differently. Marines like Lance Corporal Jamie Tran, an Oklahoma farm kid with a crooked smile who worked twice as hard just to keep up. Or Marcus Reed from Detroit, who needed someone to show him how to lace his boots right and never forgot the lesson once he learned it. They didn't care if I was exceptional. They cared that I showed up, that I knew their names, that I didn't throw them under the bus when things went sideways. One night, after a grueling exercise, Ortega and I sat on the tailgate of a government pickup. Dust clung to our boots, the sky fading into black. He handed me a lukewarm bottle of water. "You don't peacock, ma'am," he said. "They follow the standard top," I answered, unscrewing the cap. He grinned. "Maybe, but they remember who said it." That was Ortega, never flowery, always blunt, but he understood something my father never would. Leadership wasn't about flash. It was about presence, about knowing who you carried with you when the dust settled. But still, the shadow of Chase lingered. Christmas cards arrived like clockwork, Chase front and center, Elaine's handwriting curling proudly around his achievements. "Chase is doing so well. We're so proud." Not a word about me, not a line about deployments or the Marines who depended on me. I kept the cards anyway, tucked in a shoebox under my bunk. Not because I valued them, but because they were proof that I wasn't imagining the divide, that the favoritism was real, documented in ink and glossy photographs. The Corps wasn't blind to it either. Rumors floated, whispers of reshuffles, plum assignments that landed in Chase's lap before he'd earned them. And me? I was shuffled into staff work, late nights bent over rosters, red ink bleeding across paper until my eyes blurred. Once Ortega dropped a folder on my desk. "There's another set of orders moving," he said. I frowned, pen pausing mid-stroke. "For who?" He tapped the corner of my notebook, the one where I kept names, dates, every detail that mattered. "Paper wins wars, ma'am. Don't forget that." At the time, I didn't fully understand. I thought he was reminding me that the quiet work mattered, that numbers and notes were invisible armor. But later, I would realize he was telling me something else. The receipts were already stacking up. Someone was watching. Someone was keeping record. And someday, those records would speak louder than favoritism ever could. The desert doesn't care who you are. Rank, pedigree, last name. It strips everything down to sweat and grit. Helmand Province proved that better than any lecture ever could. It was 2014, and our convoy had been grinding through dust-thick roads that seemed endless. The air shimmered with heat, the kind that seeps into your bones until you can't tell if your sweat is drying or if you've stopped sweating altogether. I was coordinating from the second Humvee, headset pressed to my ear, eyes flicking between the map and the road ahead. "Maintain spacing, eyes sharp," I ordered, my voice steady, though my hand trembled against the clipboard. The first blast came sudden and merciless, an IED under the lead vehicle. The sound wasn't just noise, it was a punch, a tearing of earth and metal that made the air itself ripple. The Humvee's frame buckled, dust and flame shooting skyward. My lungs seized. "Contact, contact!" The radio squawked, voices overlapping in panic. "Keep moving," I barked. Push through, push through." Rounds pinged against steel, ricochets singing like deadly insects. The second Humvee swerved, then corrected. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my words came clipped, precise. "Suppressive fire on the ridgeline, get those gunners up!" Then the second blast tore the ground. Not directly under us, thank God, but close enough to jolt every bolt loose. Shrapnel cut through the air like knives. "Driver, stop! Stop now!" I yelled. The Humvee rocked to a halt. Smoke and dust swallowed the world. I threw the door open, heat and grit slamming into me like a wall. I dropped low, rifle slung, sprinting toward the wreckage. A Marine screamed, the kind of sound that tears something inside you. Marcus Reed, his voice cut through everything. "Rifle! I need my rifle!" His leg was gone below the knee, blood soaking into desert dirt that didn't care about sacrifice. He still clawed for his weapon, fingers slick with red. "Hold still," I shouted, crouching beside him, my hands pressing down hard against the tourniquet. Another Marine was fumbling to apply. "You're not dying here, you hear me?" "Rifle," he begged, his eyes wild, desperate. I gripped his shoulder, forcing his gaze to mine. "You're staying, with us. That's an order." Around us, chaos roared. Gunners fired steady bursts toward the ridge. Another Humvee reversed awkwardly, Marines dragging out the wounded, some coughing through the smoke. I pulled 2 others from the wreck, bodies heavy with gear and blood. My arms screamed, my lungs burned, but adrenaline carried me. Every step was a gamble. Every second, I expected another blast to rip the ground open. We regrouped in the cover of a shallow ditch. My voice carried over the radio, giving coordinates, ordering movements, even as my throat tore from shouting. "Keep the convoy moving. Get the wounded to the Cassavac point. Stay on me." By some grace, we didn't lose more. We kept the line intact, extracted the injured, and fought our way back through dust and gunfire. When silence finally fell, it wasn't relief. It was hollow. My notebook felt heavy in my pocket as I scribbled names with a shaking hand, each letter carved like it could anchor a soul to memory. I didn't trust official reports. I didn't trust the system to remember the right details. So I wrote them myself. Back stateside, there was no parade, no speeches, just the routine grind, motor pool checklists, paperwork piled like sandbags, the smell of oil that clung to my camis, even off base. One night, sitting alone at my desk, I stared at the Red Cross message from years earlier, the one that had come too late when my mother passed. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. That's when Ortega found me. "Ma'am," he said, leaning against the desk with a cup of coffee that smelled burnt. "Been in since 91. I've seen a lot of officers. You're one of the few who doesn't just punch the clock." I shrugged, my pen frozen over a log sheet. Doesn't seem to count for much. He gave me a look, not pity, something firmer. "Counts to your Marines, that's enough." Maybe it was, maybe it had to be. But at night, I couldn't shake the sound of Reed's screams, the weight of pulling men out of twisted steel, the heat of blood on my hands. I couldn't shake the emptiness of knowing none of it would make it into a Christmas card, into a speech, into the neat rows of medals that gleamed on my father's chest. So I went to the VFW post one evening, number 9479, off Highway 24. The bar smelled of stale beer and lemon cleaner, the walls covered with faded photos of men younger than me who had fought in wars older than mine. Joe McCready sat hunched over a glass, his hair thin, his hands scarred. He looked up as I slid onto the stool beside him. "You look like you just swallowed glass," he said. I told him a little, just enough. Not the full story, never the full story, but enough for him to nod slowly. "Kid," he said, his voice gravel and whiskey, "sometimes the salute comes late. Don't quit before it does." His words hit harder than he knew. A promise, a warning, maybe both. I left that night with his words echoing in my head. The salute comes late. But would it come at all? Back at base, I sat on my bunk, the shoebox of Christmas cards under the bed. Chase's smiling face stared up from every one, framed by my father's pride. My hands itched to burn them, but I didn't. Not yet. They were proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining it. Proof that what I'd done, what I'd carried, didn't matter in his world. But someone else had seen. Someone had kept records. Someone had whispered to Ortega that paper wins wars. And somewhere, quietly, the receipts were beginning to stack. By the time I rotated back stateside, Chase was everywhere. His photo hung on bulletin boards. His name slipped into conversations in offices he hadn't even set foot in. He was the golden boy in dress blues, ribbon rack neat but thin, his career a rocket on a launch pad built for him. Me? I was back in the staff shop, hunched over rosters, red pen bleeding across paper until my eyes blurred. It was the kind of work no one noticed until it went wrong. Schedules, logistics, casualty reports, all of it stacked into piles that looked more like obstacles than accomplishments. One afternoon, I stepped out into the hallway after hours of cross-checking equipment requests. The bulletin board outside the CO's office gleamed with a new set of orders. Marines clustered around, their chatter buzzing like flies. My eyes scanned the page. Chase Rawlings, Operations Billet, a plum assignment. The kind that opened doors, the kind Marines dreamed of with a fraction of his time. My name followed, tucked low on the page. A staff billet, administrative, the kind nobody remembered. Someone clapped Chase on the back. Man, you're set up for success now. He grinned, awkward in the attention, but proud. I folded my arms and stared until the black ink blurred. 12 years, and that was my reward. Later in the hallway, my father intercepted me, his cover tucked under his arm, expression brisk. Your orders came through. Solid assignment, he said. You're dependable, and the Corps needs that. Congratulations to Chase, I answered flatly. He gave a nod, satisfied. He's exceptional. You're steady. Nothing wrong with steady. It was meant as reassurance. Instead, it felt like a verdict. That night, I ended up at VFW 9479 again. The bar was loud with pool balls clacking and Merle Haggard crooning from a dusty jukebox. The fryer sizzled in the back, the smell of grease hanging in the air. Joe McCready pulled up a stool beside me. You look like you swallowed glass again, he said. I told him what happened. Chase promoted, me sidelined. Joe shook his head slowly. The Corps has always had favorites, he said. Don't let it make you forget who you are. Who am I, Joe? I asked, quieter than I meant. He studied me, eyes sharp, behind a film of age. You're the kind who'll take a bullet for your Marines and not brag about it. The kind who writes their names down so they're never lost. That counts. Maybe not today, but it will. His words didn't erase the bitterness, but they planted something steady in the hollow. Back on base, the grind continued. More rosters, more training calendars, more hours spent ensuring other Marines had what they needed while I remained invisible. Then, one evening, Ortega appeared in the doorway of the staff shop. My desk was buried under files, my hands stained with red ink. He didn't say anything at first, just dropped a manila envelope onto the table with a quiet thud. There's something moving, he said. I frowned. Moving where? He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. Higher up. Don't look so surprised. My pulse quickened. For who? He tapped the corner of my pocket notebook. Paper wins wars, ma'am. You've been keeping receipts without knowing it. When he left, the room seemed too quiet. My hands trembled as I slid the envelope into the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't open it. Couldn't. Not yet. I couldn't bear another disappointment, another reminder that steady wasn't enough. But whispers began to ripple. A captain I barely knew shook my hand in the chow hall and said, About time. Marines from other units nodded in passing, like they knew something I didn't. Even Reed, hobbling slightly on his prosthetic, gave me a look one afternoon and said, Guess they're finally seeing what we already knew. One night, Ortega leaned against the doorway again, his coffee steaming. Ma'am, you remember that convoy in Helmand? I swallowed. I remember the weight of them. I remember Reed screaming for his rifle, even though his leg was gone. That's the kind of thing the Corps forgets, he said, unless someone makes sure they don't. I pulled open the drawer then, my hands unsteady. The envelope waited, silent, heavy. Inside, I found a compiled package. Statements, after-action reports, eyewitness accounts. My name threaded through every page, not in my handwriting, but in the words of others. At the top, stamped in heavy ink, recommended promotion and award approved. I stared until the letters blurred, my breath caught in my throat. You did the work, Ortega said quietly from the doorway. She just tied the ribbon on it. She? I asked. Captain Carter, she pulled the reports together, knew what she was doing. My chest tightened. Denise Carter, an officer I hadn't worked with in years, hadn't forgotten. She'd seen. She'd kept the receipts when no one else would. The orders weren't just a bump. They were a leap. Promotion to major. Assignment as Battalion Operations Officer, S3. And the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal to go with it. This has to be a mistake, I whispered. Ortega shook his head. No mistake. The signature's already on it. Secretary of the Navy himself. And guess who's required to read it aloud at the next ceremony? The truth hit me like a body blow. My father. Protocol was protocol. He would have no choice but to stand on that stage, folder in hand, and speak my name out loud. That night, I sat on my bunk, the shoebox of Christmas cards spread across the floor. Chase in the middle, Elaine's looping script circling him with pride. 12 years of being overlooked, dismissed, called steady but never exceptional. 12 years of bleeding into silence. My jaw clenched until it hurt. But when I thought of my mother's words, just show up, do the work, my anger steadied. This wasn't about revenge in the cruel sense. It was about being seen for what I had already done. The reckoning was coming. And this time, there would be no hiding. Ceremony day arrived heavy with Carolina humidity. The air outside the base theater clung to my skin like damp cotton, every breath thick, every step weighted with what was about to unfold. Inside, the lobby buzzed with chatter. Families filed in, kids tugging at parents' hands, the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the August heat. Condensation ran down a cooler full of water bottles by the door. An usher in white gloves handed out programs, his eyes flicking to my uniform before whispering, "Ma'am?" He didn't know where to seat me. I told him I was fine in the middle rows. I wanted to feel the room. The carpet smelled of polish layered over dust, the kind of scent that never really leaves old theaters. I slid into my seat halfway back. The cushion exhaled with a tired sigh. To my left, a boy in a tiny camo shirt kicked the chair leg until his mother caught his ankle. To my right, Ortega sat with a folded program on his knee, his nod steady, his silence the same as always. Across the aisle, Elaine hovered over Chase like a stage manager. She smoothed his dress blues, dabbed a tissue against his jawline, adjusted a ribbon that didn't mean much yet. Her eyes flitted over me for a brief moment, polite as porcelain, then back to her chosen son. Chase's smile wavered, too wide, too bright for the lights. In the back row, the VFW jackets glowed a tired blue. I spotted Joe McCready by the tilt of his cap, his body angled slightly forward as though he couldn't lean back if he tried. Reed and Tran slipped into seats nearby, their postures awkward but proud. Reed's tailored pant legs swayed slightly as he sat, his crutches leaning against the wall. Tran fidgeted with her ribbon rack until she spotted me, then sat rigid as a ruler. The lights dimmed. A petty officer tapped the microphone, the hollow pop bouncing off the walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice rang, cheerful and trained. "Welcome to Camp Lejeune's Base Theater for today's recognition ceremony. Please silence your phones. We will begin with the presentation of the colors." We rose. Boots struck the floor in cadence. Rifles gleamed in the dim light, flag fringe brushing the air as the color guard crossed the stage. The anthem came too fast, as it always does indoors, but voices rose anyway, some cracked, some sure, all stitched together in stubborn unity. When we sat again, programs rustled like dry leaves. The MC moved briskly. First came re-enlistments, certificates, small awards. Families clapped, children squealed, and for a moment the air lightened with ordinary pride. Then came Chase. "Corporal Chase Rawlings," the MC announced, in recognition of achievement. Applause broke out as Chase crossed the stage. He didn't stumble, but he didn't stride either. He stood stiff, hands clenched, smile too fixed. My father clasped his hand firmly, posed for the camera with the look of a man fulfilling prophecy. Elaine dabbed her eyes in the front row, lips trembling with manufactured joy. I felt nothing, not bitterness, not envy, only stillness. A few more awards followed, achievement medals, good conduct, nothing that would be remembered outside this room. And then the MC picked up a darker folder. Its leather caught the stage lights, the seal pressed deep into the cover. He handed it to my father with two hands, reverent, as though it were something fragile. "By direction of the President," the MC began, his voice pitched higher now, "we proceed with the reading of official orders." My father accepted the folder. His hands looked steady to most, but I knew better. The small flecks of tendons at his wrist, the thumb pressing hard into the hinge as if testing the leather. The theater air thickened, the hum of the ventilation, the shuffle of shoes, even the faint creak of the stage boards, all of it felt louder, sharper. He opened the folder. From where I sat, I couldn't see the words, but I could see his face. At first, there was no reaction, just the efficient cadence of a man used to reading orders. "Headquarters, United States Marine Corps. The following orders are effective immediately." Then his eyes stuttered, the cadence faltered. For a half second, he looked up, not at the audience, not at the ceiling, but at me. The weight of 12 years hung in that glance. Refusal, denial. Something more dangerous than shock. He dropped his gaze back to the page, but the letters refused to rearrange themselves into the world he wanted. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," he continued, his voice a half-second late. The microphone captured every hitch. The audience leaned forward, breath caught, waiting for the name. He swallowed, his jaw tightened, the muscle at his temple pulsed. "You can't be serious," he muttered, too close to the mic. The sound amplified, rolling through the theater like a gunshot. The audience rippled, whispers breaking out. "Isn't that his daughter? Did he just say—" Elaine's head snapped up, eyes wide. Her hand landed on Chase's forearm, her nails pressing crescents into the fabric. Chase's smile faltered, collapsing into a blank stare. My father froze. The folder shook faintly in his hands. He cleared his throat, tried again. "For meritorious service under hazardous conditions," the words spilled out in official cadence, but his voice cracked, thinner now. The audience sat in stunned silence. Then he said it. "Captain Norah Whitaker." My name echoed through the speakers, flat, public, undeniable. The hush was absolute. I could hear the hum of the air vents, the squeak of someone shifting in the back row. Ortega's sleeve brushed against mine, grounding me. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. Reed whispered, "Ma'am," as if speaking the word could anchor me. Tran's shoulders squared, her breath catching like she'd just surfaced from deep water. Joe in the back row gave the faintest smile, the kind that meant, "This is what we've been waiting for." The MC stepped in, professional and unflinching. "Would Major Select Whitaker please come forward?" I stood. My knees didn't buckle. My shoes clicked on the polished floor, the sound sharp against the silence. Every face was a camera, every eye a lens. As I moved down the aisle, the colors on stage seemed too bright. The fringe of the flag shimmered gold, the brass on the mic glinted like morning sun on steel. At the foot of the stairs, a petty officer offered his hand. I shook my head. I climbed the steps clean. On stage, the lights burned hotter, pressing down like judgment. I came to attention, squared my shoulders. "Major Select Whitaker reporting as ordered, sir." For a fraction of a second, his eyes slid past mine like water sliding off wax. Then they settled, pinned there by the weight of the room, by the gaze of every Marine, every family member, watching. And in that silence, I saw it, the battle between father and general. One wanted to deny me, the other had no choice but to pin recognition where it belonged. The general won, barely. He reached for the medal. His hand didn't shake, but his breath caught faintly, the kind you notice only when you know the man too well. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," he said, his voice back in cadence, brittle but steady. He pinned the commendation to my chest with careful fingers that never touched skin, only fabric and metal. The oak leaf waited. His wrist stiffened as he hovered for a heartbeat, as though fighting one last internal war. Then the pin slid through clean. He smoothed the cloth with a flat palm, stepped back for the cameras. Flashbulbs burst. Applause began in the back, slow, deliberate. Joe's hands, scarred but steady, clapped first. The sound rolled forward, Marines picking it up next, then families, until it filled the theater with something rawer than ceremony, agreement. The MC raised his voice over the din. "Ladies and gentlemen, Major Norah Whitaker." The applause still rang in my ears as I stepped off the stage. My shoes squeaked faintly against the polished floor, each sound swallowed quickly by the roar of the room. Behind me, the MC moved on with the program, but the real story had already been written. In the lobby, the tide of families and Marines spilled outward, programs fluttering into bins, children darting between legs. The chatter rose in uneven waves, whispers of shock, admiration, speculation. I felt every glance like a pinprick, but I kept my chin level. Joe McCready and two other VFW men stood near the exit. Their jackets sagged with age, but their salutes were steady. Joe didn't cheer or clap this time. He simply raised his hand, eyes locked on mine, the gesture exact. I returned it, my throat tightening. Reed hobbled toward me on his crutches, his grin crooked but fierce. "Told you they'd see," he said. Tran hovered behind him, her eyes damp though she tried to blink it away. "You did it, ma'am." I wanted to tell them it wasn't about me, that it was about them, about all the names in my notebook. But the words stuck, too heavy. I just nodded. Elaine was next. She approached with that brittle smile she wore when pretending nothing had cracked. She extended her arms for a half-hearted hug I didn't return. "We're very pleased for you, Norah," she said, her voice pitched high. Then, lower, almost conspiratorial. "He'll come around." Maybe she meant my father. Maybe she meant Chase. Maybe she meant herself. "Maybe," I replied, or maybe I didn't. The words felt like smoke, dissipating as soon as they left my mouth. She gave me the church hug you reserve for strangers, then retreated toward Chase. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes downcast. His jaw worked as though chewing on words he didn't know how to say. Finally, he muttered, "I didn't know. Not like that." "It's not a contest," I said, softer than I felt. "Wear the uniform honest. That's most of it." He nodded, shame clouding his face, and drifted back toward Elaine. Then a woman with a notepad and camera badge appeared. Public Affairs. Her voice was quick, eager. "Major Whitaker, could we get a statement for the base newsletter? Just a line." I met her eyes. My instinct was to give the polished answer, the one that would smooth things over, but I thought of my mother's voice. "You don't owe anyone pretty words. Just show up. Do the work." "Not today," I said simply. Her brows lifted, surprised, but she nodded. She would print something anyway, maybe a quote from the MC, maybe just a sanitized line about service, and maybe, in its absence, my silence would speak louder. When the crowd thinned, I slipped out. Evening pressed against me, the air thick with pine and heat. Cicadas buzzed in the trees. I drove with the windows down until the theater was miles behind, until the weight of stairs and whispers lifted slightly. I ended up in the back lot of St. Andrew's Methodist, the bricks still holding heat from the day. I sat in the car, engine ticking cool, and pulled out my old phone. My thumb hovered over a saved voicemail I hadn't been able to delete in years. My mother's voice filled the car, thin but steady. "Kiddo, you make this family look tall." I listened once, then scrolled to the duplicate I'd saved long ago. I deleted the copy. One version was enough. I didn't need backups to believe her anymore. Back in quarters that night, I opened my notebook and wrote 2 letters. The first to my Marines. Plain, direct, the standard I expected, the promise I owed. No speeches, no polish, just clarity. The second to Mr. and Mrs. Reed in Michigan. I told them their son's grit had carried more weight than he knew, that his courage had steadied men twice his age, that his jokes in the darkest moments had been lifelines. I signed it simply, folded it neatly, and pressed the stamp down hard as if sealing truth into paper. Before lights out, I pulled the shoebox of Christmas cards from under my bunk. I didn't burn them. I stacked them tightly, then slid the photo Ortega had taken, me under the flag, Joe saluting steady, on top. A new cover page for an old file. The ceremony had shifted something in the air, but the fight wasn't over. Chase's shadow still lingered, my father's silence still cut sharp. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt something dangerous humming in my chest. Not bitterness, not anger, hope. The next morning, I put on the uniform the same way I always had. Slow, careful, brass checked by touch. But the oak leaf on my chest caught the light differently, glinting sharp against the wall. It felt less like decoration and more like a weight pressing me forward. At 0800, I reported to the S3 shop. The smell hit first. Burnt coffee, printer toner, tired carpet fibers worn down by years of boots. Desks were cluttered with stacks of training schedules and unfinished reports. Marines looked up as I entered. Some called me ma'am. Others just shifted, making space without words. Ortega was already there, a stack of calendars in his hand. He dropped them onto my desk with a quiet thud. "We're behind on May," he said. "Let's fix that." I pulled the top sheet toward me. Lines of drills, ranges, inspections, all the things that kept the machine moving. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of work that landed you in glossy programs, but it was the work that got Marines home with all their fingers, the work that meant a mother could open her door without a casualty officer standing there. We dug in. Tran stopped by, with a draft roster, her shoulders squared, eager to prove herself. Reed hobbled in later, his grin wry, offering to help organize despite the hitch in his step. The office hummed, the steady rhythm of competence. And then my father appeared. He didn't come inside. He held the doorframe like a man steadying himself on a boat. His eyes skimmed the room, landed on me. "Major," he said. The word carried less strain this time. "Good work yesterday." "Yes, sir." A pause stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Then he gave a small nod. "Carry on." He left before I could answer. I didn't follow. I turned back to the calendars. Some repairs aren't made with words. They're made in the quiet grind of doing the job where everyone can see. Later that week, Carter found me. She appeared in the doorway with a folder under her arm, her expression calm but sharp. "Your package almost didn't make it," she said, no preamble. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "There were obstacles." She opened the folder, revealing printed email chains, redacted, but not enough to hide intent. Someone had tried to sandbag the submission, bury it under paperwork until it expired. No name stood out, but the implication was clear. My father's office had fingerprints on it, if not his own, then those loyal to him. Carter's voice dropped. I can push this higher. Launch an inquiry. Make sure the favoritism gets exposed. I stared at the pages. The temptation was sharp, immediate. The thought of dragging truth into daylight, forcing accountability, stripping away every false shine. But I also thought of Chase, standing in the lobby with his eyes downcast, muttering that he hadn't known. I thought of Elaine's brittle smile cracking at the edges. I thought of the Marines in this office, watching how I carried myself. This would scorch them, Carter said plainly. Not just your father, Chase, too, the whole structure. My jaw ached from how tightly I clenched it. And if we don't? Then things keep going. Quieter, maybe. People learn where the lines are. She studied me, her gaze steady. The choice is yours. When she left, the folder sat heavy on my desk. I didn't touch it for hours. I just kept working the calendars, marking ranges, signing off on inspections, while the weight of decision pressed down like another pin on my chest. That night, Ortega leaned against the doorway, coffee steaming in his hand. You've been quiet, he said. There's a file, I answered. Evidence. Proof of what I already knew. And I don't know if exposing it helps or hurts. He sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing. Sometimes the fight is loud. Sometimes it's not. What matters is the standard you set. Marines watch that more than they watch headlines. I turned his words over in my mind long after he left. On my bunk, I opened the shoebox again. Chase's face smiled up from Christmas cards, Elaine's handwriting looping with pride. On top, the new photo, me under the flag, Joe saluting steady. 2 versions of the same story, one loud, one quiet. Which one would I choose to live by? The folder sat on my desk for 3 nights before I decided. Each evening I'd run my fingers along the edge, tempted to tear it open, tempted to sign my name under a complaint that would shatter more than reputations. But each morning I put my uniform on, brass checked by touch, calendars squared away, Marines' names remembered. And I began to understand. This was never about bringing anyone down. It was about lifting the right things up. So I chose. I documented everything, every obstacle, every order delayed, every whisper I'd heard about doors opening for Chase that should have been locked. I wrote it clean, precise, stamped with dates and signatures. But instead of throwing it into the fire of scandal, I sealed it in a file marked for record. If the system tried again to bury someone else's worth, there would be proof waiting. Then I set my focus on the living. I pushed through policy changes in the S3 shop, small at first, but sharp enough to matter. Transparent billet criteria, mentorship boards that included junior Marines, evaluations with room for context beyond numbers. Paper trails that could outlast favoritism. Tron blossomed under it, finding her confidence. Reed took on a training role, his crooked grin steadying recruits who needed a model of resilience. Ortega, as always, stood quiet at my flank, anchoring without asking for recognition. The work didn't make headlines, but it reshaped the floor we walked on. And then weeks later, a letter surfaced. Joe found me at the VFW post one Friday evening, a folded envelope in his scarred hand. This got misrouted years ago, he said. Ended up in our post's mail pile somehow. Figured you ought to see it. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. It was addressed to my father, written in my mother's familiar slant. Buck, it began. She may not be the child you dreamed of, but she is the one who carries everything you claim to value. She leads without needing applause. She protects without needing credit. One day you'll see it. I just hope it isn't too late. My throat tightened as I read it again and again. My mother had tried to bridge the chasm long before I even knew it existed. He'd never read it. Or maybe he had and buried it. Either way, it had found its way back to me now, when the timing cut deeper than coincidence. I left the letter in its envelope, but I carried the weight of her words like armor. Not long after, my father appeared at the S3 shop again. He stood in the doorway as he had before, cover under his arm, posture crisp but not unyielding. Major, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Good work. The words landed differently this time, not as a verdict, not as a dismissal, as something closer to recognition. Thank you, sir, I replied. Our eyes met for a beat. He didn't add more. He didn't have to. Some repairs are welds made slowly, cooled by time and consistency, not flashbulbs. That evening, I sat at my bunk with the shoebox. The Christmas cards were still there, but now the photo of Joe's salute sat on top, and beside it, the letter from my mother. Together they were a new file, past and present layered, weighted, undeniable. I didn't feel triumph, not revenge. What I felt was alignment. A sense that I had finally stepped out of the shadow, not because the spotlight found me, but because I had built a path where shadows couldn't dictate my worth. At the next drill, I walked the range line, clipboard in hand, boot steady. Marines straightened as I passed, not because of the oak leaf on my chest, but because they knew I showed up. Later, when Reed dismissed his recruits, he caught my eye and gave a small nod. Tron jogged past, sweat streaking her face, determination burning in her step. Ortega leaned against a Humvee, arms crossed, that faint grin tugging at his mouth. It was a different kind of salute, one built on presence, not pageantry. That night, as cicadas sang and the Carolina air pressed thick against the windows, I sat with my notebook open. I added a new name to the list. Not one of the wounded, not one of the fallen. My own. Not for vanity, but for record, for memory. Because respect isn't inherited, and worth isn't a hand-me-down. It's earned in ordinary days, in unglamorous hours, in calendars squared away, and letters stamped true. And sometimes, if you keep showing up, the salute comes late. But when it does, it sticks.